The morning the black cars came, the sky above Harrow Peak had not yet decided whether to be day or night. That gray space between, where the world holds its breath, where the pines stand like witnesses to something they cannot stop. She heard them before she saw them. Engines, low and deliberate, climbing the mountain road that hadn't carried a stranger's sound in years. Not delivery trucks, not lost hikers. Something else. Something that belonged to men who arrive with purpose and leave with what they came for. Marit stood at the kitchen window, her hands still warm from the mug she had just set down, her breath fogging the glass. 3 vehicles. Black, identical, moving in formation through the trees like something rehearsed. Her pulse didn't quicken. It stopped. Then restarted at a rhythm her body remembered from another life. One she had spent 4 years teaching herself to forget. Behind her, Veda sat on the floor, stacking wooden blocks with the focus only a child can give to something so small. Her dark hair fell across her forehead, her little fingers placing each piece with a patience that felt too old for someone not yet 3. She hummed softly, filling the cabin the way sunlight fills a room, without effort, without apology. Maret's eyes moved from the window to the man standing at the door. Joran had already seen them. She knew because his body had changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that shouted, but in a way that whispered something far worse. His shoulders had shifted, his spine had straightened, his jaw had set into a line she had never seen before. The softness she had known, the gentleness in his hands when he held their daughter, all of it had pulled back beneath the surface like a tide retreating before something massive arrives. He turned to her, and for one fraction of a second, she saw it. Not guilt, not fear, recognition. Like he had been waiting for this moment the way someone waits for a wound to finally open. "Stay inside," he said. His voice was wrong, not the voice that whispered to her in the dark, not the voice that sang low and off-key to Veda when he thought no one was listening. This voice carried command, authority that does not ask permission because it has never needed to. He stepped onto the porch before she could speak. Through the window she watched what happened next with the slow, horrifying clarity of someone watching a mask come off a face they thought they knew. The first car stopped. A man stepped out, tall, sharp, dressed in a way that had no place on a mountain. He looked at Joran the way soldiers look at a general they haven't seen in years. Not fear, exactly. Deference. The kind earned through blood, through things she could not imagine. He spoke one word. "Sir." Joran didn't greet him. He gave an instruction, short and flat, and the man nodded once and stepped back. 2 more men emerged from the second vehicle, and they did the same thing. Waited, watched, obeyed. Her hands began to shake. She had seen this before. Different men, different mountain, different life, but the same geometry. Power arranging people around itself, turning grown men into furniture that moves on command. She knew what it looked like because she had lived inside it once, and it had nearly killed her. The man she had let into her home, the man she had let into her bed, the man whose child was sitting 3 feet behind her stacking blocks and humming, was not a lost carpenter who wandered out of a storm. He was one of them. Behind her, Veda looked up. Her eyes, pale green and impossibly calm, tracked the movement outside with a stillness that mirrored her father exactly. "Mama," she said, "why are those men listening to Papa?" The question hit like a hand around her throat. Not because of what it asked, but because of what it proved. Even a girl not yet 3 could recognize the shape of command in a man she had only ever known as gentle. Maret did not answer. She crossed the room, locked the door, pulled the curtain shut, and pressed her back against the wall, sliding down until she was on the floor. Her mind tried to rearrange the last 3 years into something that made sense, and every version collapsed under the same unbearable truth. She had run from one monster and fallen in love with another. Veda crawled into her lap, her small hand reaching up to touch her mother's face. "Mama," she whispered, "you're shaking." Outside, the man who had no name she could trust anymore stood on the porch of a cabin that had once been the safest place on earth and gave orders to men who would have killed for him without hesitation. And inside, the woman who had believed she was finally free realized she had never stopped being trapped. She had only changed the shape of the cage. I did not always live in silence. There was a time when my world was full of noise, the wrong kind, the kind that came without warning and left bruises in places no one thought to look. His name was Dagon, and he was the most charming man I had ever met. That should have been the warning. Men who are that easy to fall for have usually practiced on someone else first. He had a smile that made rooms tilt toward him, a voice that could convince you of things you knew were not true, and hands that were gentle right up until the moment they were not. I married him because I believed what he showed me, the tenderness, the attention, the look that made me feel like I was the only fixed point in his world. I thought I was his anchor. I did not realize I was his possession. It started small. It always does. A comment about the way I dressed. A suggestion that became an instruction. A door that locked from the outside when he left for work. The world shrank around me in increments so tiny I did not notice until there was barely room to breathe. Dagon was not a man who lived in the open. He worked for people whose names were spoken in low voices, if they were spoken at all. I never knew the details, but I knew the shape of it. The late-night phone calls that changed his posture. The men who came to the house and never smiled. The money that appeared in amounts that had no explanation and required no questions. I learned not to ask. Asking led to silence. Silence led to worse. The first time he hit me, I told myself it was an accident. The second time, I told myself it was my fault. The third time, I stopped telling myself anything at all. I just learned to read the air the way animals do, sensing the shift before the storm arrives, adjusting my breathing, my voice, my body to whatever shape would keep me safe for one more hour, one more night. People ask why women stay. They ask it like fear is just a feeling you can set down and walk away from. But fear rewires you. It teaches you that the world outside the cage is more dangerous than the cage itself. And by the time you realize the lesson is a lie, the door feels impossible to open. I stayed for 3 years. 3 years of learning his moods like weather patterns, of folding myself into smaller and smaller spaces, of watching the woman I used to be disappear behind the version of me he preferred. Quiet, grateful, afraid. The night I decided to leave was not the worst night. That is what people never understand. It was not a night of rage or bruises I could not hide. It was ordinary, and that was what made it terrifying. He sat across from me at dinner, eating with the calm precision of a man who controlled everything around him. And he looked up at me. Just looked. Not angry, not drunk, not provoked. And I saw something I had never seen before. Emptiness. Not the absence of feeling, but the absence of me. I was not a person to him. I was furniture. Something that existed because he allowed it to, and could be removed just as easily. That look lasted maybe 2 seconds. He went back to eating. Said something about the food. I responded carefully, correctly. But inside, something had broken in a way that could not be repaired. I was going to die in this house. Not dramatically, not in a single violent moment. I was going to disappear slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to save. And no one would notice, because no one was looking. That was the night the decision was made. Not with courage, not with a plan, but with the cold, terrible clarity that comes when survival finally outweighs fear. Dagon was not a man who lost things willingly, and I was something he considered his. Leaving meant preparation. Leaving meant patience. Leaving meant becoming the woman he believed I was. Quiet, obedient, invisible, until the moment I used that invisibility to vanish for real. It took me 6 weeks to plan what I did in one night, and the night I left, I did not run. I walked. Slowly, deliberately, like a woman who had finally remembered that she had legs. The 6 weeks of preparation were the loneliest of my life because I had to pretend nothing had changed. I smiled when he expected it. I cooked what he wanted. I moved through the house like the version of myself he had built, compliant and predictable and small. But underneath, something was working. Something quiet and precise that had nothing to do with the woman he thought he owned. I started with money. Small amounts skimmed from the grocery budget, bills folded into the lining of a coat he never noticed me wearing. Doggin tracked everything. He knew what things cost the way other men knew sports scores, with casual accuracy and no tolerance for discrepancy. So I was careful, patient. I treated every stolen dollar like a brick in a wall I was building between his life and mine. Then I found the cabin. Not by searching, because searching left traces, and traces were a luxury I could not afford. I found it by accident in a free classified paper at the laundromat, a place Dagan would never enter and therefore never think to monitor. A small listing in the back pages. Remote property, Harrow Peak, long-term rental, cash preferred, no questions. It felt like the world had slipped a note under my door. I memorized the number. I called from a payphone 4 miles from the house during a grocery run he never questioned, because the milk was always cold when I returned. The woman on the other end had a voice like gravel and kindness, and she asked me only one thing. When do you want to start? The night I left, Doggin was 300 miles away doing work he would never explain. He had kissed my forehead before leaving, the way he always did, like pressing a seal onto something he owned. I waited 2 hours after his car disappeared. Then I moved. I packed one bag. Clothes that did not carry his scent. The cash I had saved. A photograph of my mother he had never cared enough to notice. I left the rings. The dresses. The careful lie of a home that looked normal from the outside and rotted from within. The bus station was 9 blocks away. I walked them in the dark, each step lighter than the one before, not because I was free, but because I was finally moving in a direction I had chosen myself. The bus took me north, through towns that got smaller as the hours passed, through stretches of land that felt like the world was thinning out on purpose, making room for people who needed to disappear. By dawn, I had transferred twice. By afternoon, I was on a road no map would bother to name. By evening, I was standing at the base of Harrow Peak, looking up at a tree line that swallowed everything above it, breathing air so clean it almost hurt. The cabin was exactly what the listing promised, which is to say, it was almost nothing. 4 walls, a roof that leaked in 2 places, a wood stove that worked if you knew how to argue with it, and silence. Deep, heavy, absolute silence. The kind that presses against your ears until you realize the ringing you hear is your own heartbeat, finally loud enough to notice. I stood in that doorway the first night and cried. Not from sadness, not from relief, but from something I could not name. Something that lived in the space between what I had survived and what I had not yet become. The tears lasted maybe 10 minutes. Then I wiped my face, locked the door, and started a fire. The first weeks were hard in ways I had not expected. Not the physical work, though that was relentless. What was hard was the quiet. After 3 years of reading another person's mood like a survival manual, the absence of threat felt wrong. My body kept waiting for footsteps, for a door opening too hard, for the shift in pressure that meant someone dangerous was close. But no one came. Days passed, then weeks, then months. The mountain held me the way I imagined a mother might, steady and vast enough to make my problems feel like what they were: small, survivable, behind me. I built something there, not a life exactly, but the skeleton of one. A structure I could grow into if the world gave me enough time. And for a while, it did. The mountain was quiet, the road was empty, and the storms, when they came, passed without consequence. Until the night one of them didn't. The storm arrived like it had been planning something. Not the usual mountain weather that blew in hard and left fast. This was different. This settled over the peak like it intended to stay, like it had business here and would not leave until that business was finished. The wind came first, sharp and sudden, bending the pines until they groaned. Then the rain, not falling but driving sideways in sheets so thick the tree line disappeared entirely. The temperature dropped fast enough that I could feel it through the walls, through the fire, through the blanket I pulled tighter around my shoulders. The sound came just after midnight. Not thunder. Something heavier. A thud against the porch, dull and uneven, followed by a scraping noise that made me freeze with my hand on the poker, and my breath locked between my lungs and my throat. Every instinct Dagon had carved into me said, "Do not open that door. Stay small, stay hidden." But there was another sound after the thud, quieter, almost swallowed by the storm. A voice. Just one word, barely formed, a sound a person makes when they are too far gone to manage anything more. I opened the door. He was on the porch, half collapsed against the railing, soaked through in a way that made his clothes look like they had been poured onto him. Blood on his forehead, dark and already mixing with rain. His hands gripped the wood like it was the only thing keeping him from sliding off the edge of the world. His eyes found mine, unfocused, struggling, but aware enough to register that someone was there. I should have closed the door. I should have pretended I hadn't seen him, waited for the storm to carry him wherever storms carry the things they break. That is what a careful woman would have done. A woman who had already learned what happens when you let a stranger into your life. But his hands were shaking the way mine used to shake when Dagon's car pulled into the driveway. That tremor I knew too well made the decision before my mind could argue with it. I pulled him inside. He was heavier than he looked. Dead weight against my shoulder as I dragged him across the threshold, rainwater pooling on the floor I had swept that morning like it mattered. I got him to the rug near the fire, lowered him down, and knelt beside him to check what was wrong. The cut on his head was shallow but ugly. His breathing was ragged, too fast. His jacket was torn at the shoulder, and underneath the fabric his skin was bruised in a pattern that did not come from falling. Someone had done this to him. Recently. I cleaned the wound, wrapped it with what I had, built the fire higher, and sat across the room with a knife in my hand, while I waited for the stranger on my floor to either wake up or stop breathing. He did neither for a long time. The storm raged. The fire cracked and popped, and I sat watching a man I did not know lie bleeding in the only safe place I had ever built, wondering if I had just made the best decision of my life, or the last one. By morning, the storm had passed. He was still there, and so was I. He woke on the second day. Not all at once, but in stages, like someone climbing out of deep water. His eyes opened first, gray-green and sharp. They swept the room before they found me, cataloging walls, windows, exits in a single pass, a habit that belonged to someone who was used to entering spaces where danger might be waiting. Then they landed on me, and the sharpness softened. Not entirely, not performed, but enough that I could see the effort behind it. Like gentleness was something he had to reach for, rather than something he carried naturally. "Where am I?" His voice was rough, stripped down to nothing but function. "Harrow Peak. My cabin. You showed up on my porch in the storm. You were bleeding." He touched the bandage on his head, testing the damage. "Thank you." 2 words. No elaboration. I waited for an explanation, a name, a reason for why a grown man was broken and bleeding on a mountain in the middle of nowhere. He offered nothing. "You have a name?" I asked. A pause. Brief, but I noticed it. "Joran." He stayed because his body would not let him leave. His shoulder was worse than I had thought, bruised deep into the muscle, and the fever that came on the 3rd night kept him flat for nearly a week. I fed him broth, changed his bandages, kept the fire going, and maintained enough distance to survive if I was wrong about him. But I was not wrong. Not in the ways I feared most. He did not raise his voice. He did not fill silence with demands. He did not look at me the way Dagon used to, like I was something to be managed. He looked at me the way you look at someone who saved your life, and you are still trying to understand why. Weeks passed. Once he could stand without gripping the wall, he started doing things I never asked for. The roof leak I had been catching with a bucket for 8 months, fixed in an afternoon. The woodpile I had been slowly working through, split enough in 2 days to last the season. The back door hinge that screamed every time I opened it. Silent now. Smooth. Like it had never been broken. He worked without speaking, without asking for thanks, without making it feel like a transaction. That was what undid me. Dagon's kindness had always been conditional. Every gift a receipt. Every gentle moment an invoice I would pay later. Joran's hands fixed things and then let go. I began talking to him in the evenings. The mountain, the weather, the way elk moved through the lower valley at dusk. He listened with his whole body, leaning slightly forward, his silence an invitation rather than a wall. He told me small things, that he had worked in construction, that he had traveled, that he had no family he was close to. Each answer explained just enough and revealed just little enough that I accepted it without pressing further. I noticed things. His light sleep and instant waking at small sounds. His eyes tracking movement through the trees with a precision no carpenter possesses. His expression at the window when he watched the road below, an expression that had nothing to do with scenery and everything to do with calculation. I noticed, and I let myself not notice, because the alternative was asking questions that might take away the only thing that had felt right in longer than I could remember. And that, I would learn later, was my second mistake. My first had been trusting a man who hurt me. My second was trusting a man who had not told me who he was. The sickness came without warning, the way most truths do. One morning I was fine. The next, the smell of coffee sent me stumbling out the back door to empty my stomach into the snow while the world tilted sideways and refused to level out. I told myself it was the altitude, the cold, something I ate. I kept telling myself that for 11 days before I drove down the mountain to the only pharmacy within reach, bought what I needed with cash, and sat in the truck for 40 minutes before I had the nerve to look at the result. Pregnant. The word sat in my lap like something fragile and sharp at the same time. I stared at the small, undeniable confirmation of a truth my body had been whispering for weeks, and I felt the world rearrange itself around me in a way that could not be undone. I drove back up the mountain in silence, my hands on the wheel, my mind anywhere but steady. Every mile carried me closer to a cabin where a man I had known for 4 months was waiting. A man whose last name I had never asked for, whose past I had chosen not to question, whose hands I had trusted because they were kind, and I was tired of being afraid. I was carrying his child, and I did not fully know who he was. The fear came fast, but not the kind I expected. Not fear of him, fear of myself, of the pattern I could feel repeating beneath my feet. I had trusted Dagon too. I had believed him too. I had built a life inside his version of safety and nearly disappeared because of it. I told him that evening, not gently, not carefully, but directly, watching his face the way I used to watch Dagon's, bracing for the shift, for the mask to slip, for the thing underneath to finally show itself. His expression did not change the way I expected. There was no calculation, no claim, no sudden possessiveness. Instead, something cracked behind his eyes, something deep and private that he had been holding in place with the same discipline he used for everything else. He stood slowly, walked around the table, and knelt in front of me. Not above me, not over me, in front of me, so that his eyes were level with mine. He took my hands and held them like they were the most important thing he had ever touched. "Whatever you need," he said. "Whatever you decide, I'm here." No demand, no expectation, just presence, offered without conditions, and I hated how much I needed to hear it. Veda came in early spring when the snow was melting and the mountain was making sounds it only makes when winter is losing its grip. The labor was long, harder than anything I had prepared for, and he stayed through every hour of it, calm and impossibly present. She arrived just before dawn, small and serious, with a cry that sounded more like a question than a protest. He cut the cord with hands that did not shake, and when the midwife placed her in his arms for the first time, something happened that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. He looked at her the way someone looks at the first thing they have ever been afraid to lose. I named her Veda. It means knowledge, truth, something found after searching. It felt right for a child born in a place built on secrets, to a mother running from one life, and a father hiding another. We built something in the months that followed. Routines, rhythms, the small, ordinary architecture of a family. He held her at night when she wouldn't sleep. I watched him build her a crib from pine he cut himself, sanding every edge until his fingers bled because he could not stand the thought of a single splinter touching her skin. It was beautiful. It was real. And it was built on something I did not yet know was broken. Because the man who sanded wood until his hands bled for his daughter was the same man whose name, when spoken in certain rooms in certain cities, made grown men leave the building. The man she knew as Joran had been someone else long before he bled on her porch. In 3 cities along the Eastern Corridor, his name was not spoken casually. It was measured, weighed, delivered with the care people reserve for words that carry consequences. He had built an empire not through violence alone, though violence lived comfortably within its walls, but through precision and patience. Through understanding that real power is quiet, structural, embedded so deeply into how things work that removing it would collapse everything around it. By 32, no decision of significance within his territory passed without him. Ports, supply chains, political alignments, financial corridors that moved money the way rivers move water, in directions he had carved years before, anyone noticed the current had changed. Men followed him because the alternative was irrelevance, and in his world, irrelevance was a death sentence delivered in slow motion. But empires built on control attract a specific kind of enemy, not the loud ones who announce their intentions with gunfire. The dangerous ones grow inside the structure like rot in a beam, invisible until the weight shifts and everything cracks. His name was Farron, a man Joran had trusted for 9 years, who had access to schedules, routes, safe houses, and the intimate architecture of how Joran moved through the world. Farron betrayed him not for money alone, but for a seat at a different table, one being built by a coalition of families who had decided Joran's control had lasted long enough. The attempt came on a night Joran should not have survived. 3 men, a private road, a vehicle tampered with in ways his own security should have caught. The car went off the road at speed. The men came after, expecting a body. They found neither. Joran pulled himself from the wreckage with a dislocated shoulder, a gash across his forehead, and the cold clarity that arrives when you understand the people trying to kill you are the ones you trusted to protect you. 2 of them did not walk away. The third ran. Joran walked, bleeding, unsteady, moving through terrain he did not know, away from roads, away from signals, away from every system that had once kept him alive, but now served as a map for the people hunting him. The storm found him on the second night. By the time he reached the cabin, he was no longer thinking about empires or betrayals. He was thinking about breathing, about making it to the next step, about the light through the trees, faint and warm, like something that did not belong to his world but might let him exist in it. She opened the door, and everything he understood about himself began to collapse. He did not plan to stay. The first days were survival, nothing more. His body healing, his mind calculating exit strategies, timelines, the fastest way to reestablish contact with men he still trusted and begin dismantling Farron's operation. But something happened that no calculation had accounted for. She talked to him, not with deference, not with fear, not with the careful performance people used when they knew what he was. She talked to him like he was ordinary. He had never been ordinary. He had never been allowed to be. And the first time she laughed at something he said, genuinely laughed, unguarded and warm, he felt something shift inside him that he did not know how to put back. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. He fixed her roof because it needed fixing. He split her wood because she needed wood. He stayed because every morning he woke up in that cabin, he was someone he had never been before, someone without a title, without a territory, without the weight of decisions that shaped other people's lives. She made him human. She reached past every wall he had built and found the version of him that existed before power had turned him into something else. When she told him about the baby, the man he used to be would have seen it as a vulnerability that could be weaponized. But that man was already gone. The one kneeling in front of her, holding her hands, understood only one thing. He would die before he let anything touch this. So he said nothing about who he was, not because the truth did not matter, but because the truth would end everything. She had run from a violent man. She had rebuilt herself from nothing. And he knew, with certainty, that the moment she learned what he was, she would see Dagon's shadow behind his eyes. She would not hear the difference. She would only feel the pattern. He chose the lie. He chose every morning with her and every night with his daughter over the truth that would take them away. And he knew, even as he made that choice, that it was only a matter of time before the world he had left behind came looking for what it had lost. It was not carelessness that exposed him. It was love. Veda had a fever the autumn she turned 1. High, sudden, the kind that turns a child's skin into something burning from the inside. Maret drove her down the mountain to the clinic in the valley, and Joran went with them because staying behind was not something his body would allow. He sat in the waiting room while a doctor examined his daughter, and he did what any father would do. He gave his name when the receptionist asked for it. Not his real name. A version he had used before. Clean, untraceable, built for situations where anonymity was required. But the woman at the desk typed it into a system, and systems have memories that people do not. 1,400 miles away, in a room Joran had not entered in over 2 years, a man named Halsen sat in front of a screen running searches he had been running every single day since his employer disappeared. Halsen was not muscle. He was not a strategist. He was loyal, the kind of loyalty that does not expire, does not negotiate, does not stop looking when everyone else has accepted the loss and moved on. The name triggered a flag. Not a match. Not a confirmation. just a vibration in a web stretched across every database Halcyon could access. A medical intake form in a rural clinic in a mountain region that had no business appearing in any search connected to Joran's network. It took Halcyon 11 months to confirm what the flag suggested. Months of cross-referencing, of mapping, of following a thread so thin that any reasonable person would have dismissed it. Halcyon was not reasonable. He was relentless. And when the thread led him to Harrow Peak, to a cabin registered under a cash rental with no name attached, he did the only thing his loyalty allowed. He went himself. And he brought men, not to retrieve Joran by force, but because the information he carried required protection of its own. Joran felt them before he saw them. The silence of birds in the trees. The faint vibration of engines on a road that never carried traffic. He was standing in the kitchen when it happened. Marit was at the window. Veda was on the floor. And the moment he heard the engines, the man he had been for more than 3 years, the father, the carpenter, the man who sang off key to his daughter, stepped back, and the man he had been for the 32 years before, that stepped forward. He saw her face through the window as he walked onto the porch. He saw the exact moment she understood. Not what he was, not yet, but that he was not what she had believed. The recognition hit her like something physical, and he watched the woman he loved become the woman he was about to lose. Halcyon stepped out of the first vehicle. The word came before anything else. "Sir." And behind him, through the glass, he heard the lock turn. He dealt with his men quickly. Halcyon delivered the information that had driven him up the mountain. Farron was dead. The coalition had fractured. Joran's territory had been held barely by men who refused to let it collapse. But that was not why Halcyon had come. A man named Dagon had been making inquiries. Quiet ones, persistent ones, the kind that move through networks like poison through water. He was looking for a woman who had disappeared over 4 years ago from a life she was never supposed to leave, and the searches were getting closer. Not to this cabin, not yet. But close enough that the distance was measured in weeks, not months. The name hit Joran like a blade between the ribs. She had never given him the full story, never spoken the name, but she had told him enough. The flinch when a door closed too hard, her habit of sleeping with her back to the wall, the scar along her arm she never explained. He sent the cars away, every one of them. Then he turned back to the cabin, to the locked door, to the silence on the other side, and he understood with absolute clarity. The woman behind that door believed she had been deceived by a dangerous man. She was right. But the danger was not him. The danger was coming. And he was the only thing standing between her and it. He did not leave. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled the curtain back an inch the next morning, my eyes burning from a night spent not sleeping. He was sitting on the porch steps, his back to the door, his coat pulled around him against the mountain cold. He had not knocked. He had not called my name. He had not done any of the things Dagon would have done, the pounding, the shouting, the demands delivered through wood like warnings before a breach. He just sat there, like the mountain itself. Like something that was not going to move regardless of what I wanted. Veda knew something was wrong. Children always do. They cannot name it, but they feel the shift in the air the way birds feel changes in pressure before a storm. She was quieter than usual, staying close to my legs, watching me with those pale green eyes that looked so much like his. "Where's Papa?" she asked on the first morning. "Outside," I said, because lying to her felt worse than the truth. "Why?" "Because I need him to be outside right now." She accepted that the way children accept things they do not understand, but trust their mothers to have reasons for. She went back to her blocks, but I could see her looking at the door, measuring the distance between it and me. By the second day, the cold had turned sharp. I watched him through the window at dusk, and he had not changed position, had not gone to the truck his men had left behind, had not built a fire or sought shelter. He sat on those steps like discomfort was something that happened to other people. I hated that I noticed. I hated that I counted the hours. I hated that some part of me, the part that had watched him sand a crib until his fingers bled, was calculating how long a man could survive on a mountain in early winter without food or warmth. On the third morning, Veda stood at the door and pressed her hand flat against the wood. She stayed like that for a long time, not knocking, not speaking, just touching the barrier between her and her father like she could feel him through it. "Mama," she said quietly, "Papa is cold." The words landed somewhere between my ribs and stayed there. "I know," I said. "Can I give him a blanket?" "No." "Why not?" "Because if I open that door, I do not know what happens next. Because the last time I trusted a man, I almost disappeared. Because the man on the other side of that wall is not who I thought he was. And I do not know what he is instead." I did not say any of that. I just shook my head, and Veda looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not defiance, disappointment. The kind that comes from a child old enough to recognize that the person they trust most is making a choice they do not agree with. That look almost broke me. By the fourth day, something had shifted inside me. Not toward forgiveness, not toward understanding, but toward exhaustion. The kind that comes from holding a position so rigid for so long that your muscles start to give whether you want them to or not. I kept replaying the years we had built together. Every conversation, every silence, every moment where I had noticed something and chosen not to look closer. His eyes tracking movement in the trees, his awareness of exits, his way of holding Veda, not like a man learning fatherhood, but like a man who understood exactly how fragile the things that matter most can be. He had lied to me. That fact was immovable, a wall I could press my anger against and feel it hold. But underneath the anger, a question was forming. One I was not ready to ask but could no longer ignore. If he was truly dangerous, if he was truly like Dagon, he would not be sitting on those steps in the cold. He would have broken the door down on the first night. He would have taken what he wanted the way men like that always do, but he didn't. And that single stubborn fact was the crack I could not seal. On the morning of the fifth day, I opened the door. He looked worse than I expected. 4 days on a mountain porch in early winter had done what I imagined it would. His face was drawn, his lips cracked, his skin carrying the grayish pallor of someone who had not eaten or slept properly in days. But his eyes were the same, clear, steady, waiting. I stood in the doorway with my arms crossed and Veda behind me, watching from the gap between my legs with cautious curiosity she had inherited from him, though I did not want to think about that right now. "Talk," I said. One word, no warmth. He did not stand. He stayed where he was, looking up at me from the steps. And when he spoke, his voice was rough from cold and disuse, but controlled in a way that made me angrier because it reminded me of the man I had trusted. "My name is Joran Mathen," he said. "I run the Eastern Corridor. 3 cities, supply lines, financial operations, security infrastructure. 11 years. I did not choose this life, but I did not walk away from it either." The words arrived like stones dropped into still water. "Men work for me," he continued. "Dangerous men. I am not a good man by most definitions, but I am not the kind of man you think I am." "You don't know what I think you are," I said. "I know exactly what you think." His gaze held mine. "You think I'm him. Different face, different hands, same machinery underneath. You think you made the same mistake twice." The accuracy almost made me step back, almost made me close the door again. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question I had been turning over for 4 days. He exhaled slowly. Because you would have left. The first night, the first week, any point in those 3 years. If I had told you what I was, you would have taken Veda and disappeared the way you disappeared from him. And I would have deserved it. So you decided for me, I said. You took the choice away. Yes. No defense. No justification. Just the admission, bare and unflinching. That's what Dagan did, I said, quieter than I wanted. He decided what I was allowed to know, what was best for me. Something moved behind his eyes. Pain, genuine and immediate. I know, he said. And I have spent every day since those men arrived knowing that the worst thing I did was not what I hid from you. It was that I made you feel the same way he did. Silence sat between us. Veda pressed closer against my leg. There's something else, he said, and his voice changed. Tighter, like what came next required more control than everything before it. The man you left. Dagan. My breath stopped. I had never told him Dagan's name. How do you know that name? My people found it. Dagan Vasa. He worked enforcement for a syndicate connected to the families that tried to kill me. Same network, different levels of the same machine. He paused. He has been looking for you. Quietly, methodically, for the past 2 years. The searches are getting closer. Not to this cabin, not yet. But close enough that the distance is measured in weeks now, not months. The ground shifted beneath me. The safety I had carved out of nothing, the fortress of silence and distance I had built around myself and my daughter, all of it was thinner than I had believed. That's why your men came, I said slowly. Yes, not to bring me back. To warn me. To warn us. Us, I repeated, and the word felt foreign, like something I had stopped believing applied to me. He stood then, slowly, not approaching, just rising to meet me at something closer to level. I am not asking you to trust me. I lost the right to ask for that. But I need you to know that whatever you decide, whether you let me stay or send me away, I will not let him reach you. Not you, not Veda, not ever. I stood there for a long time. The mountain was silent. Veda's hand loosened on my leg, and she stepped forward, looking up at him with no anger, no confusion, just the simple recognition of a child who sees her father and wants to be near him. And I realized the most terrifying truth of all. The man I had shut out was not the danger. He was the wall between me and it. And the wall was asking permission to stay. He did not move back inside that day. I did not ask him to. Instead, he slept in the truck his men had left behind, parked 30 feet from the cabin, close enough to hear if anything happened, far enough to give me the space I had demanded without words. The days that followed had a strange quality to them, like living in a house after an earthquake where the walls are still standing but nothing feels trustworthy. I cooked. I cared for Veda. I moved through the routines I had built, but every motion carried the weight of knowing that the foundation beneath them was not what I had believed. He came to the porch each morning and sat, not waiting for permission, not asking to come in, just existing in the space between us like someone who understood that proximity without pressure was the only language I would accept. Veda was the first to cross. She walked out one afternoon while I was washing dishes, opened the screen door with both hands and went straight to him, climbing into his lap with the decisive confidence of a child who does not understand why adults make simple things complicated. I watched from the window. My chest hurt in a way that had nothing to do with anger. It took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of him sitting in the cold. 2 weeks of Veda carrying small offerings to him, a cracker, a crayon, once a sock she had found under the couch, presented with the seriousness of a peace treaty she did not know she was drafting. 2 weeks of me standing at the window, counting the reasons I should not trust him against the evidence that he was not who I feared he was. The night the call came, I was already not sleeping. Joran's phone lit up the inside of the truck. I watched through the curtain as he answered, listened, and then moved with a speed and purpose I had not seen since the morning the black cars arrived. He made 3 calls in under a minute. Then he was gone, the truck pulling down the mountain road with its headlights cutting through the trees. He was back before dawn. I was sitting at the kitchen table when he walked up the porch steps, his knuckles raw, and his expression unreadable. He sat in his usual spot and waited. I learned what happened 3 days later, when Halkin drove up alone and spoke to me directly because Joran had told him to. Dagon's men had reached the valley. 2 of them, scouting, mapping, asking questions at gas stations and trailheads with photographs that were 4 years old but close enough to matter. Joran had intercepted them. Not with spectacle, not with the violence I had been taught to fear, but with precision. They were redirected, their information dismantled so thoroughly that the trail now led to a dead end 700 miles in the wrong direction. Dagon would not stop searching. Halkin told me this plainly, but the path to Harrow Peak had been erased. And the man responsible for erasing it was sitting on my porch, asking for nothing. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after Halkin left. I thought about Dagon, about the cage he had built around me with control and silence and pain. I thought about Yorin, about the lie he had told, and the truth he had lived inside it. Both men had kept things from me. Both had made decisions about my life without my consent. But Dagon had done it to own me. Joran had done it to keep me. The difference was not small. It was everything. I opened the door that evening. He was sitting in his usual place, his face turned toward the tree line. He looked up when the hinges creaked, and the expression that crossed his face was not relief. It was the look of a man who has been holding his breath for so long that the first inhale feels like it might break something. Veda needs her father inside the house, I said. My voice was quiet. Not warm, but no longer cold. He stood slowly. And you? I held the door open wider. Not all the way. Not yet. But enough. I need the man who sanded a crib until his hands bled, I said. I need him to be real. He is, Joran said. He always was. He stepped inside. The door closed behind him. Not with a slam, not with finality, but with the soft click of something finding its way back into place. The mountain settled around us. Veda's breathing carried softly from the other room. And for the first time since the black cars came, the cabin on Harrow Peak felt like what it had been before. Not perfect, not safe in the way I once believed, but honest, and mine, and his, and ours, and that, after everything, was enough.